Just imagine being on a campus that hasn't even started thinking about this yet. You've been given a 7 to 8 month timeline to do work that folks like you have been doing for 12 plus months.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of ed tech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday, I'll break down what actually matters. Fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. Today's episode is for anyone watching the SUNY Mandate land and wondering how 64 campuses are going to pull off an AI policy by December 31st. Today, I'm joined by Ed Tatton, a leader bridging communications, innovation, and AI governance at SUNY Westchester Community College. Ed serves as co-chair of the college's strategic AI committee and leads the operational subcommittee. He's been at SUNY for 18 years and his background sits at the intersection of design, marketing, and communications, which gives him a rare lens on AI. He sees the institutional strategy and the operational risks that most people miss. Ed, it's so good to see you. Welcome to the Pulse.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, Mallory.
We were talking right before we clicked record about all the travels that you have been up to this year. I mean, have you barely even been on the campus? I feel like Ireland coming up, you've been to Iceland and all over the US. If you just had to pick one place that you were most excited about going, where is it?
So I've been to Scotland before, I've been to England, but this trip in July, we're going to hit Northern Ireland. And so I'm really excited to see Belfast. And I think that's something unique I'm looking forward to this summer.
Awesome. Will you be kissing a Blarney Stone?
No kissing of the Blarney Stone for me. I try and stay off the tourist path wherever I travel. That's kind of my thing. One of my big deals is I don't want to contribute to over-tourism, so I try and avoid some of those real hot spots and live like a local, as they say.
Ooh, that sounds like so much fun. Well, good luck with all of your travels. But before we send you off to Northern Ireland, we have to talk about something that SUNY made official just about a month ago. The Board of Trustees passed a system-wide AI policy that puts all 64 SUNY campuses on the clock. Every campus has to adopt or update their AI guidelines by the end of the year. The policy includes 7 mandatory minimums covering role definitions, procurement safeguards, faculty training, bias evaluation, and oversight on high-risk AI systems that impact students. SUNY framed it as a comprehensive guidance with campus autonomy. For most institutions, I think it landed as a mandate with a deadline. And I think this is what a lot of listeners might not know. While the system was building that framework, Ed and his team at SUNY Westchester were already a year into the work. For the last academic year, Westchester ran a Center for Teaching and Learning series that pulled faculty, staff, and administrators into the room to talk about AI from every angle: classroom use, academic integrity, equity, et cetera, et cetera. They surveyed faculty, they listened to students, and they used what surfaced, the enthusiasm and the concerns, to shape principles and policy that reflect how campuses actually work. Ed's argument: guardrails should reflect the campus, not a template. That's the test every SUNY campus is about to face. So Ed, let's get into this. The mandate has landed and the clock has started, but you were already a year in when the system handed down that policy. Now, inside your operational subcommittee, what did May 4th actually feel like? And did you know that this policy was coming?
So no, did not know this policy was coming. We heard rumors that there may be one coming, but we weren't sure when exactly it would drop. So I felt mostly vindicated when it did come down, not in like a self-congratulatory way, but we just didn't want SUNY to tell us what to do. We wanted to build that infrastructure so that when they did tell us what to do, we already had that answer.
Mm-hmm. Did anything tick you off though in the mandate? Like when you read it, we were like, oh my God, we've been doing this for a year, y'all.
I wouldn't say really ticked me off, but there was one, I consider it like a structural tension. As you mentioned, there's a deadline for December 31st for that publication deadline. And one of the recommendations that we made is for a dedicated director of AI strategy and governance position. And so the way that our budget cycle works here at the college, we would need presidential and cabinet approval in fall of 26. Which means we wouldn't necessarily meet that deadline for a new position, but the recommendation is there. So our budget request would go in January 27, and then September 1st, 2027 is when the accounting would actually fall into place and we'd be able to hire somebody for that position. So not necessarily ticking me off, but definitely some structural tension in what we're able to do.
Yeah. Well, and just imagine being on a campus that hasn't even started thinking about this yet. You've been given a 7 to 8 month timeline to do work that folks like you have been doing for 12 plus months. I mean, that's like challenging to say the least. I don't know.
Yeah. And so first off, let's go back just a little bit. We did submit a plan, and we have a plan that has 17 different appendix documents tied to it. And that plan was submitted on May 8th to the president, the cabinet, the board of trustees, student government association, and faculty senate. And we had a 3-tier structure, like you had mentioned. So we had a steering committee that I co-chaired with Professor Nicole Champel on our campus. And we had our operational subcommittee that I chaired, and then an academic subcommittee that Nicole chaired. So we were in a good place to create this framework to get us going before that document came down from SUNY.
Cool. So you've been at SUNY Westchester for 18 years. And as we noted in the intro, like you've been in a lot of different roles. You've seen things from a lot of different perspectives on your campus. You know, a year plus ago, like let's take a big step back. What made you and others at your level realize like, hey, we need to start building some AI guardrails? I think this was well before it seems anyone at the system level was even talking about AI policy.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I kind of raised a flag to the president's office and said, you know, there's this thing called AI, and we probably should start talking about it. But it wasn't until the fall of 25 where my buddy, Professor Nicole Champel, invited me to this Center for Teaching and Learning series. And she wanted to open up a space and bring me in as a co-host, but it wasn't really designed as a place for policy building. It was more of a space to ask questions, exchange info. And so that was long before any institutional position was formed with our committee. And so the CTL, which we call the Center for Teaching and Learning for short, is a teaching and learning space, not necessarily a governance room. And faculty kind of say things that they necessarily wouldn't say when we put them at a table in a committee. So what really surfaced there is stuff that you can't manufacture. One of the things we talked about was AI used as like an amplifier versus a generator, and the distinction between those two. And that came out from faculty conversation. And so that kind of led us to think about acceptable AI use and revisit like our academic honesty policy. And so those are things that Faculty Senate, we made recommendations to look at in fall of 26.
So you said that sometimes faculty are more open to saying things in that environment than they might in others. But was there that, like, there's always that one person, right, who kind of shows up with their arms crossed, very skeptical, and maybe they've already, like, in their head drafted the complaint email. Did you experience that?
Yeah, so I'd say there were two concerns that came up consistently from what you consider an AI skeptic. First was and you hear these regularly outside of higher ed. First was the environment. So faculty are asking about the data center energy consumption, water usage explicitly in multiple sessions. And it's not necessarily that they're anti-technology, it's just they're concerned about the impact that the technology has. And so we actually worked some of these concerns into our plan. One of the environmental concerns was worked into a vendor evaluation criteria document that we created. So any tools that we look at, we're going to look at, take that into consideration. And we want people to feel validated with the input we got. The second was a big one that you hear in higher ed, which is AI is eroding critical thinking. And so a business class where an AI generated summary contained some outdated information was submitted, and the student never really questioned the information that was in that AI-generated report. And so we talked about students accepting AI output as fact rather than cross-checking or cross-referencing that information. And faculty began asking, like, if we normalize this, what are we actually teaching? And so those are the kind of things that helped us build a framework to make recommendations to move forward in fall 26.
I was talking to a student like literally this morning who goes to University at Albany, and she was maybe the first 20-year-old that I've talked to who was like, I don't use AI. She was like, because if I started using AI, I don't exactly know what I'm doing going to class and paying all this money for my education. And I was like, you are literally the first person I think I've ever talked to at that age who isn't telling me that, they're using Claude to complete all their homework assignments. I was honestly shocked.
Well, I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, there's been news stories of commencement speakers at University of Florida, University of Arizona, who mentioned AI and got booed, not very politely. And I think there was a Gallup survey that said 18% of people between age and 29, they feel more hopeful about AI, but more than 70% of Americans say that it's moving too fast. And I think that's some of the things that we see in our CTL sessions is, there are skeptics and it's not a fringe amount of people. So some say we're early and some people are nervous and some people push back. So it's not going to stop. So how do we adapt?
Yeah. Well, in all of this work, I'm sure you have been looking at a lot of data like what you just shared out, but also synthesizing survey data from your own students and faculty. So kind of let's talk about that. When you kind of strip out maybe the stuff that's happening externally and you just hone in on your audience at SUNY Westchester, like what are people actually asking for and what are they afraid of?
Yeah, so we did a campus-wide survey in January, which is right when our committee was charged, and we wanted to make sure that all the work we were doing was rooted in data. And so faculty don't want to be the only person in the building who kind of drew a line when it came down to AI in the classroom. They wanted the institution to draw it with them. And we saw that with 81% of faculty in our survey want a clear institutional policy, and 65% wanted sample syllabus language. And so that's not asking for a lot, it's just asking for some backup. But what they were actually afraid of was an erosion of their authority, not necessarily the technology itself. 90% were concerned about the loss of critical thinking, which we discussed, and 84% were worried about student over-reliance. And so that's a fear about what the classroom becomes in the future going forward. There's also real anxiety about faculty becoming detection officers and having them responsible for surveilling student work, filing reports and appeals, grade appeals. But one of our clearest governance moves was codifying the opposite, and that an AI detection score alone is not sufficient grounds for academic misconduct. And so that kind of surprised me, but it was a good turnout of the report. And I think the other thing that was really interesting was students. The student data that we got back kind of reframed what we were thinking about young people and how they want to operate within our institution. So one thing that surprised me about the student data that we got was 50% of our students are already using AI for coursework, but 64% who cited cheating concerns aren't primarily worried about their own behavior. They're worried about fairness. If the person next to them uses it and they don't, who gets the better grade? And to me, that was a question of equity, not necessarily a confession of use. We also are a Hispanic serving institution, and so for first-generation students and English language learners, they face a real disadvantage when it comes to AI, and that was also a concern that was raised in our CTL sessions by faculty. So the campus that just says use AI responsibly without any support structure isn't actually serving those students, that student population.
Well, yeah. I mean, what does responsibly mean? Like, you have to define the word, and it could be defined so many different ways, one institution to the next. The student I was talking to this morning was very concerned about all the other people in her classroom who might be using it because she's opting out. And she told me a story about how one of the papers she wrote a few months back, which she at least claims was, AI free, got flagged by one of these detection services, and she had to really fight all the way up to the dean of her department. She was like, I'll let you log into my ChatGPT. I didn't use AI, and yet it still flagged it for her. So I think your data around the equity piece, I feel like that is a top student concern for sure right now. So Ed, you said in prep for today's episode that you would rather build guardrails than chase adoption. I'll say I tend to fall on that same line as well. But I think a lot of people hear guardrails and they think slow down. So in your opinion, like, can guardrails actually make an institution faster? And where's the line for you between protecting the campus and like kind of getting in your own way because you've put too many guardrails in place?
Sure. So, like I said, we only started the actual committee work in January, and we delivered our report in May. So we didn't have much time, but we did want to make some progress immediately. And so our first concrete action from that committee was a document that we shared out called the Interim Guidelines for Responsible AI Use. And it had 7 guiding principles that we published and had out to the campus in February, while the committee was still doing the rest of the work. And those principles covered data privacy, restricting PII and public AI tools, keeping HR data out of open AI systems, accessibility compliance, vendor transparency requirements, and my favorite one was human oversight for consequential decisions. And so this document gave some advisory language, not necessarily policy, and it was explicitly designed to reduce institutional risk while we did some of that deeper governance work. And so you don't have to necessarily wait for the perfect document to have any document. Just giving people something to orient themselves while you do the harder work was really important to us. And we based all those principles on the survey data that we received, which was also important to me. So when 94% of the administrators here were already using AI tools with no institutional oversight, the governance question stops being theoretical at that point. And so that was the first document. And then we kind of worked forward to create guardrails and guidelines going forward.
So you just said that the doc you produced back in January had 7 principles. The SUNY policy also listed 7 mandatory pieces. Did they align 1-to-1?
Not necessarily, but there was a lot of good overlap there, which is why it was so encouraging when I did see that memo come down about the work that we had started. And one of the conversations that I had right after the delivery with our college president, President Miles, was the fact that she wants me to kind of adapt these into templates that we can share out with the other 2-year institutions within SUNY in case they haven't taken that first step.
That's awesome. So of the 7 that SUNY listed, right, and just to recap, it's role clarity, procurement, bias evaluation, training, oversight on high-risk AI, at least I think that was 5 of the 7 or so. But anyway, which of those do you think most campuses are going to underestimate?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say underestimate probably procurement safeguards. Every campus is going to write a policy to be compliant and think they're done, but procurement is really where exposure lives, and the policy is kind of the front door. And so the vendor contract is really that back door that nobody checks. We actually built 3 instruments specifically for procurement. We had a build versus buy framework, which looked at us building a large language model or hosting a model locally versus buying like an AI tool from OpenAI or Gemini, or in our case would have been Microsoft. And we also created a Fastgate document, which is a 10-question document on the department level for if anyone's being sold an AI tool that they can quickly say, yes, this is going to be good, or if any flags come up and says no, it gets kicked up to IT. And then we actually looked at the vendor criteria that IT already uses, and we just expanded upon that. We added a 55 criteria vendor evaluation tab to their spreadsheet across 9 different categories that only activates if that first Fastgate document clears. And so we just wanted to make sure that we're keeping our data secure. And so we have questions about model training opt-out information with software, making sure things are WCAG compliant. There's a contract exit right, and any labor or union implications, which of course are important for state colleges, universities.
So you let me know that SUNY community colleges aren't just operating under this new system-wide policy. There's like this whole separate layer of state and SUNY-specific regulation that governs how community colleges like Westchester handle data governance and vendor relationships. And your board, faculty, senate, and union structures all work a little differently than a 4-year institution within SUNY does. So how does this impact the AI policy fight that you are, that hill you're climbing that maybe the 4 years just don't have to deal with?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand within SUNY is that SUNY community colleges are locally sponsored. And so that means that SUNY Westchester is sponsored by the County of Westchester, New York. And so our board of trustees has a different relationship to SUNY system administration than, say, University of Albany or Stony Brook does. It's a directive from the chancellor's office, doesn't necessarily land the same way to a community college in the system than it does a four-year. The union dimension is also different here at Westchester. Our faculty are NYSUT, and definitely politically close to leadership in a way that's different from a large research institution. And so there's a lot of discussion about job displacement that surfaced amongst our staff when we did the survey. And that's not abstract to just us, but you don't get to write a policy about AI assisted administrative workflows without having that type of conversation on the union side. And our benchmarking, we did a lot of benchmarking, and it showed that four-year institutions have established like chief AI officer roles, although some of them have really clever titles. But at a community college, shared governance isn't a procedural nicety. Your faculty union is in the hallway, your board sponsors, the county. These aren't like distant stakeholders. Everyone's kind of in the room. And so the governance architecture in our plan had to really reflect that reality. And that's different from the state entities, which operate under a certain framework, like Executive Order 117 that came down from the state. Community colleges kind of occupy this hybrid status because we report to the county as well. So I'd like to say we have more bosses, but it also gives us a little more freedom to kind of go around what's being discussed at a policy level. That doesn't mean that we're not following everything or meeting certain standards, because we actually do plan to meet every standard, even ones that come down from the state that are meant for four-year institutions. Operationally, we're going to meet those as part of our plan.
So a few minutes ago, you mentioned procurement, everyone's favorite word. And I know that, your background, right? You come from a background of design and communications, and I think you probably see this marketing layer that a lot of people in governance miss. And of course, an outcome of this is better evaluating potential AI tools. So, what are you seeing in the ed tech landscape? Like, what's good, what's not good? Where are we overpromising? I'm just kind of curious for your general thoughts on this.
So vendors have definitely figured out how to find the person that will say yes before they find the person who says, hold up and wait and let's evaluate. And so the enthusiastic pitch is very easy to hear from a salesperson. And it's a strategy, right? It's not an accident. But we hear back from the IT department once that sales pitch comes across, and that's where there's kind of a gap between what vendors believe and what your campus actually feels and needs. And that's kind of where there could be a governance gap. I think AI is moving fast enough that the rules are changing for everyone, including people like me in Marcom without a technical background. Recently, I've been vibe coding a lot. I don't know anything about code. I built a CRM for a side project of mine. It's connected to my accounting software. It was just kind of a proof of concept for me. I wanted to see what I could build. But my manager here at the college has asked me to build an internal marketing dashboard that pulls together social media reports, data from our CRM, GA4 data from Google for the website. And a year ago, a guy like me who doesn't know how to code, I couldn't have built that at all. But that's how fast this is moving, and that's exactly why the governance work can't wait for the tools to slow down. And so I wouldn't let any tool near my campus that frames itself as kind of like an institutional infrastructure, when in reality it's a consumer product with an enterprise price tag, mainly because of consumer data terms don't become FERPA compliant because you bought a site license. And so that's where we really look at how is data being stored, who has the rights to the data when we leave that product. And right now, the big thing is accessibility compliance. So yeah, there's a lot coming, and there's no better time to get started if you haven't already.
Oh, for real. And, I have a feeling there's, close to 63 other SUNY campuses who are looking towards y'all on this. There's hundreds of institutions across the country that are going to watch how the SUNY system handles all of this. And so if a peer were to call you tomorrow and say, hey, we've got 7 months and we haven't even started yet, Ed, what are you going to recommend to that person as their first move, and maybe a trap that they should avoid?
So I'd say the first move is don't start with tools and don't start with a policy document.
Amen. Preach.
I say start with governance and who owns that decision. Until there's somebody that's been named with a real escalation path, everything else is just theater, and it dissolves when the committee does. And so survey your campus first, see where the, get a pulse check on the campus, see where everyone is. You need to know what's already happening, because it is happening, and you just need to figure out how and where it's happening. We looked at our peer SUNY community colleges. None of them had any structured risk assessment, approved tool frameworks, or any employee-facing governance. The system wasn't watching over our shoulders on this. And so grounding the policy in your own data is important, and there's no real template for that. But for community colleges specifically, shared governance is not a courtesy step, because if the plan lands with faculty senate, or without faculty senate, or without staff council, or without student government, without having their input on it, it's just going to fail. And so giving everybody their lead as part of the plan is important, but definitely don't get trapped by buying some template and calling it a policy if it doesn't reflect how your campus is actually working. And so I think everyone's going to write documents for this deadline, but nobody builds that thing that maintains the document six months after it's due. And so ensuring that we have a bridge structure and a plan to continue this work forward was just as important as creating the plan.
Yeah. And that is like the mic drop to end on. I co-sign, like, this is not a policy that can just go live on a shelf somewhere once it gets drafted. There needs to be a real governance structure in place in order to carry out what the policy says. Congratulations on being ahead of doing all of this hard work. I'm sure there was a little bit of relief when you saw everything kind of land at the beginning of May, like, okay, we're at least a few months ahead of this. Ed, as we wrap this up, like, any parting thoughts?
I think AI is not going to stop, no matter how much people doubt it or don't believe in it. People are still going to use it. I think if you haven't used it, you need to familiarize yourself with it, understand simple prompt structure. And then when it comes down to policy creation, you have to survey, you have to get the data and start there, because all of our institutions are unique, and they're going to need unique responses. And so dive in, start playing with it personally before you get to it professionally. And whatever you do, don't put your institution at risk with any personal information or student ID numbers or anything like that into public tools. That's the big one. Let's reduce our risk.
Yes, amen. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ed. It was so good catching up with you today. And folks, we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.